Jack. My pronouns are they and them. I'm an activist for many different things. I'm fat, I'm black, with an Afro-Caribbean heritage, but also British. I'm bisexual. I've got multiple mental health disabilities and disorders, and also some physical long-term chronic health conditions as well. I live in the UK. I'm one of the co-founders of the support group Bisexuals of Colour, which, as far as I know, is the only one of its kind in the world. I also produced the only study about bisexual people who are black and of colour as well. Oh yeah, I'm poor. I'm working class, as in absolutely brassic and broke.
Like if someone were to, I guess, come up to you and just be like, okay, so what is your disorder, or how would you, I suppose, describe how your disorder or disorders in this case like affect you? How would you describe that?
Sure. I've got recurrent depression, anxiety, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, borderline personality disorder, which they're changing the name in the UK to emotionally unstable personality disorder. I've got dissociative identity disorder, and most of these disorders have been going on since I was 3, and so that'll be like for the past 47 years. Something I didn't say in the beginning, of course, is that I'm a survivor of abuse, child abuse, and which kept going on, even when I stopped being a child. And I'm a runaway as well. I ran away from the place I was born and the people who brought me up. I ran away 27 years ago now. I only got diagnosed as being diabetic when I ran away. I think it's no coincidence that that happened then. But how it all affects me is it leaves me feeling often that I'm just too much, that a lot of medical people can kind of deal with maybe 1 or 2 mental health conditions, but not with 5. And especially when there's so much medical racism and medical fat phobia as well, I'm really pushed to the back of the line when it comes to getting help. I also have an eating disorder as well, which I've only recently started trying to get some actual medical help for, and that is being proven very difficult. All of these mental health things also affect my physical health with my diabetes and high blood pressure. One of the things they often say when people are talking about high blood pressure is, oh, try to relax. And you think, yeah, I've got massive amounts of anxiety and PTSD, which drags me back in time to a place where I was in very immediate danger. It's really hard to relax then. And when one of my 6 alter personalities decide to do their own thing, which sometimes means just getting on a bus and going back towards where I used to live, and I'll sort of like kind of my outside personality will come to the fore and think, what the hell am I doing here? This bus takes me right back to the place where my old family live. I do not want to be going there. But yeah, it's just really hard to relax, putting it simply. Yeah, they all have an effect on my physical health, and that's something that a lot of medical people just don't get, that it affects things. A lot of lay people and even a lot of medical people see diabetes, especially type 2 diabetes, as, oh, you ate too much sugar and so that's why you're diabetic. And it is just not. If it was the case, then I think half the population of the world would be diabetic. But
Yeah.
and so they sort of there's a lot of things to do with genetics and trauma when it comes to diabetes. And as someone who has an awful lot of trauma to deal with, you know, it affects things massively. Yeah, it just feels like I'm fighting on a lot of fronts, and that is exhausting, just on a daily basis.
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, from what we've experienced, we certainly have less less mental health and physical health issues on our end, and even then it is quite difficult. So I can't even imagine how hard it would be for you and for your system, your collective, to be able to access that help, because a lot of the time, like you're saying, like once a lot of medical health professionals, whether they be, you know, just GPs or like, you know, mental health professionals, it's like you go and see them and typically they expect they're just going to be dealing with a mental health issue that's very straightforward, so to speak, that doesn't have complexities of, well, obviously with specialists, you know, they're specializing in childhood trauma and trauma disorders, but in a lot of general psychologists and therapists of the sort, they aren't equipped enough and they don't know or understand how race plays into it, how certain trauma plays into everything, how physical health issues plays into it all. And a lot of them just have this very Eurocentric, I suppose, idea of how to deal with things. And when you bring queerness into the mix as well, they kind of are just like, oh, well, have you just tried yoga? Or maybe you should just present as the gender that you were born as, so it'll make it easier. And it's like, it's not quite that simple.
Yeah. They medics do not understand non-binariness at all. Yeah, it's just like, don't even bother mentioning it. Unless I've been seeing somebody for a while, then just don't bother, because they're just not going to understand. Yeah, I was having an assessment for help with looking at my mental health medication and eating disorder the other day, like 2 days ago. And the woman on the other end, who is a psychologist, said, when I said that I had dissociative identity disorder, and she said, is that just mood swings? And I was just like, what the hell?
Goodness.
What the hell? I mean, most medics in the UK don't really know about it. In the UK, it's very rare to be formally diagnosed with DID, and I'm fortunate enough to have been diagnosed, so I can hold up my piece of paper and say, look, a clinical psychologist, you know, went through this flipping questionnaire that lasted 5 hours over 3 days. And when she actually gave me the diagnosis, and she was actually a really nice clinical psychologist, I just remember thinking, looking at the door to her office and thinking, they're never going to let me out of here, because all I'd ever heard about DID came from the old name for the condition.
Right, yeah.
Personality disorder, and I'd only ever heard about that from horrible films. Yeah, it's a pretty rare thing in the UK as far as formal diagnosis goes. And in the UK, pretty much for any mental health condition, if you're not formally diagnosed, it's like, okay, next please, thank you, next. But I live in London, you know, the capital city, there's only 2 people and 1 organisation that specialises in dissociative identity disorder. Yeah, you can only get access to the Centre for Dissociative Studies on the NHS if your GP match funds it. And so I tried 13 times in 18 months to get referred, and I got turned down every single time. So even though I'm unemployed and on welfare benefits, I have to pay to see one of 2 therapists in London to get help for my DID.
There is such a massive stigma about those who are on welfare payments. Like we ourselves are as well. But like people are just like, oh, you know, why can't these people on welfare payments just get back into the workforce, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, you know, it would, like some people, it's still not quite possible, but also things that can make it easier for people is being able to access the help. But if we can't access the help, how do you expect anyone to be able to get into the workforce for those who would be capable of doing so?
The vicious cycle. And like I was in employment for 14 years, and my last job was 6 years ago when I had a breakdown after being sexually assaulted. And I just remember all the times when I was bullied at pretty much every single job that I'd had. In 14 years, I had 5 different jobs. I'd be bullied so badly that I'd have to leave, and then the same thing would happen. Yeah, it was bullying, a lot to do with racism, but also a lot to do with needing time to go to like just the diabetic appointments, which, you know, I used to get given a really hard time about it, about speaking up or speaking back to times when people were racist or ableist to me. You know, there's a song, Diamonds Last Forever. I should have said called it Victimization Lasts Forever, because it's just once you speak up and it's like, how dare this black person speak up or talk back to me when I've treated them like trash. And that's just like the end of it. It's absolutely awful. Even when I've been volunteering, it's been the same sort of thing. And there's such a stigma about mental health issues, but also physical health issues when you actually need the time off to attend your diabetic MOT, even if it's like the 3 monthly one. It's, you know, you're supposed to work the hours back, but just given a really hard time having to out yourself to your line manager. Yeah, I need this time off because I've got a hospital appointment. Why? You had a hospital appointment 3 months ago. Yeah, okay, but... And so even before it gets to things like psychotherapy, you know, it's just that I wouldn't even bother. I would just book the time off myself, you know, and lose holiday hours and just go. Also, there was a lot of biphobia. And I mean, there's a lot of queer phobia anyway, but when it comes to being bisexual and black, oh God, I've worked and volunteered for a couple of LGBT plus charities, and as is the case for most things, when they say that they're LGBT, they're just lesbian, gay, and gay. It just doesn't help. And the thought of going back to work now full time, which I'd have to be because I wouldn't be able to support myself doing part-time hours. The thought of doing that is just, it just makes me shiver. The thought of having zero support, or having a line manager say, you know, you can always talk to me, and, you know, we're a supportive workforce. Yeah. No, you're not. No, you're not. You're supportive if someone's got depression, maybe. You hear people talking in a lunchroom or just to each other in the workplace, and there's so much bigotry. Yeah. And I don't ever want to squash down my alters. You know, when I hear my voice change halfway through a conversation, yes, I'm aware that people might sort of think what's wrong with me or want to ask intrusive questions, but I also don't want to just say, shh, not now, I'm talking. I don't want to be doing stuff like that. And when I first got diagnosed, I was reading a lot of things online, and most of the people were talking about integration. And I thought, for about a split second, oh, that would solve a lot of problems. And then after that split second, it was, no, I don't actually get to choose that. The authors can choose whether they want to stay or rest for a bit or rest for good. You know, I'm not the one making that decision, but there is a lot of pressure, internalized ableism. And also I know that as a Black person, as a fat Black person, that the chances of me ending up in a secure mental health ward are so much higher than a white person who had DID. Few times that I have been on a secure mental health ward, you'll see maybe 1 or 2 white people, but everyone else is Black. It really overpopulated. We don't, because it's just even harder for us to get therapy because we're not believed, because certain things are a white disorder, DID being very particular at that, but also that I'm seen as dangerous because, you know, Black people are inherently,
Black person.
Yeah, dangerous, angry Black woman. You know, even though I don't describe myself as a woman, as soon as people see my tits, it's a woman. So yeah, angry Black woman, and I'm gonna go off and hurt somebody or hurt myself. So I must be locked up for my own good. You know, and if I was white, even if I was white and fat, I'd be offered a lot of talking therapy before given medication. And I certainly wouldn't be sort of forced into a secure ward for my own good. I mean, it doesn't help practically that I don't have any family, and the friends that I do have are all in South London. So yeah, usually when they hear that I'm on my own, then it's like, oh, we definitely have to take you in, because yeah, I can't be trusted on my own. It's just terrible. And the mental health services under the NHS, I mean, I support the NHS totally when it comes to physical health, but when the NHS comes to mental health services, they can go to hell. They're institutionally racist. The whole system is set up to just make Black people victims time after time after time, that we don't fall through the cracks, that we're forcibly pushed through the cracks. We're not understood, and then we're given like a blunt, we're treated with a blunt instrument of like, no, you must get medication because you're a dangerous Black person and you must be put on a mental health ward or given a home treatment team. And then when you're in the mental health ward or see the home treatment team, it's nothing but racism. I was seen by a Black woman, which is really tragic. One of the times I was had a mental health crisis and was suicidal. And when I talked to her about how biphobia and queerphobia in general made things so hard for me, and she went, like the most dramatic kind of staged thing. And then she just wouldn't look at me. And another time I was encouraged to go to NHS group support. And it was just awful. It was just absolutely awful. I was talking about racism and yes, how it has an adverse effect on my mental health, even when other things are going okay internally. And the psychologist, clinical psychologist, who's white, said to me, oh, I know how it feels. I get discriminated against too because of my accent. And I complained about it and was told by a series of other white psychologists that that's not what she meant, and just completely gaslighting. And I used to work in a university in the psychology department as a secretary, and the clinical psychologist, the training and hoops that they had to jump through, it's not just it wasn't like a quick degree to get. This was a long-term thing, and I know how much training they have to get. But to be a clinical psychologist and to be so clueless about racism, it's insulting. And these are the people supposed to get me better, or supposed to help me get better. So it is just like a vicious cycle.
Yes, so many, GPs and mental health professionals that we've dealt with in the past, like even prior to diagnosis of dissociative identity disorder, are so, like you said, clueless to the fact that race plays a huge part in mental health, because it's not a simple issue. And a lot of people, a lot of white people see racism as something that is just completely directly hurtful, and it involves, a very aggressive acts of violence, when there are so many different levels and intricacies to racism that all still affect Black and Indigenous people of color. And the fact that in a profession that's supposed to be for helping people, you would think that there's some sort of learning that they should be going through in order to do that. But it's just so whitewashed. And even a lot of the queer related things are so whitewashed. It's as if being non-binary and just any other gender that isn't, cis female or male, it's like that it's only white people, it's just a white people thing.
Yeah, it's really sad for me as well, of feeling like in general, feeling like I don't belong anywhere. But when sort of people kind of seem to think and behave like being Black and being queer are completely separate. So a lot of Black people, saying to me, but you're Black. How can you be queer? You're Black. Or yeah, I'm a Christian as well. But being told to pray away the queerness, not really helpful. Or being told to pray away the disabilities. Plenty of examples of stuff in the Bible, but there's also plenty of disabled people in the Bible as well. And it's like being disabled or being queer is like the worst thing that could happen to you. And it's like, no, I have a long list of increasingly worse things that can happen, but it feels like there's no support in sort of church or religious environments, which are very ableist and very queerphobic for the most part. And there's no recognition of race or religion or queerness in straight medical places. It really feels like I'm just too much. And over the last couple of weeks, it has felt really, really awful of me actually trying to get some help for alcohol addiction, for eating disorder, and also just for general mental health, and being misunderstood, seeing ignorance and an unwillingness to learn as well. When you talk to any kind of medical person and you talk about something that they're not sure about or they don't know about, forget it. You have just hit a brick wall. They are not going to admit that they don't know something. You really get a wall of silence, which UK medical health services are renowned for. They don't want you to tell them that they don't know something, even though you've lived your whole life with it. They may have had like a 1-hour session, which was elective during their training, but you've lived with it. I've lived with it for the past 47 years, but you're just not taken seriously. They end up being very defensive or aggressive. I usually feel very I keep wanting to say isolated, but it's not. It's alienated. It's not just that I'm living on my own and I don't have any family and my friends are on the other side of London, but it's like that I've been made to feel unwelcome in so many places. And I have sort of seen in the past couple of weeks, finding out more about like the DID the Black and people of colour DID and communities online, sorry, specifically on YouTube, and just sort of hearing about them and their experiences of racism from white systems. And you just think, oh, for goodness sake, just how, I don't know, when you're in the gutter and there's still people looking down on you who are also in the gutter with you, as far as stigma for a mental health condition goes. It's like, I just feel, can you not just be racist just this time with people who are treated like trash? Can you, can you give it a rest just this once? But no.
It just like
Racism
finds a way to like follow you everywhere, like anywhere and everywhere. There's always racism. Like, you think that in a trauma community with trauma survivors that maybe just this one space, this is going to be a safe space. It's like, no. But when you try and point it out to these white systems, they just kind of don't want to hear it. They want to brush it off and just be like, but I'm a survivor of trauma, so therefore I'm exempt from being racist, or all of these things. And it's like, well, no, you still need to hear, you know, Black and Indigenous folk out, because our voices still matter in this debate. It's not up to white systems, it's not up to white people to dictate what is and what isn't racist.
Yeah. I saw a great post on Instagram. It was just a picture, and it just said, your queerness does not absolve you of your racism. And I thought, yeah, you could like change queerness to pretty much anything. It's tiring, and it's also, it's horrible. Part of the abuse, part of the non-sexual abuse was isolating myself and others as a victim of abuse, because if you don't have friends, you don't have any source of support. You don't have anyone to say, this is what's happening. And to feel like that now, that I'm kept apart from other people because of racism for the most part, but also because of ableism, because of ageism, or just the fact that I'm not in the US. It's just, it's horrible. The resurgence of Black Lives Matter in the across the world, it is a bittersweet thing for me as well. To be shocked at what happens to Black people is a privilege, because Black people, like you said, it's our lived history. Being in the UK and talking about racism, specifically racism in the queer communities, and being gaslit all the time about that, the fact that they're sort of waking up to it now, that doesn't make me feel glad, because I think about all the years, all the energy and all the defensiveness and outright aggression that I've received for talking up or just existing in a queer space. And now that they're realizing it's about racism, it hurts a lot. And there's still a lot of people, and it's very much the case in the UK, but I kind of assume around the world as well, that Black lives only matter in the US. Racism's only a problem in the US, and they completely ignore. Now, I remember hearing a white person say, oh, the police don't carry guns in the UK. And it's like, since when did you need a gun to kill somebody? And
Exactly.
Also in the UK, we have a special thing called deaths in custody. Of like, there's some police stations, you go in and you don't come out of them. You just don't even, you could go in and just report that your car's being stolen or something. You ain't getting out. And that used to be the case for a London police station in Stoke Newington. That used in the 80s, it'd always go past it. But yeah, that's the one that you never come out of if you're Black. But even the Metropolitan Police, the London police force, had this thing saying Black Lives Matter. And you just think that, I just thought, what the fuck are you saying? You treat the Macpherson's report states that the Metropolitan Police is an institutionally racist organisation. You don't have any Black officers above a certain level. And even when they get to a certain level, they're treated so badly that they just resign. You still have your stop and search thing where if you're black, it's something like 40% more likely to be stopped and searched on suspicion of a crime than you are if you're white. Do not start saying Black Lives Matter while you're bludgeoning us over the head. But it was just like everybody doing it, and it's a trend. And even now, if I look online, it's like, yeah, there's not many people saying that Black Lives Matter anymore. And so, yeah, that it only happens in the US. And even when there's US cases, that it only matters if you're a cis-het black man. So black women like Breonna Taylor, who was like sleeping in her bed with her partner, got shot up by the police, who was looking for another suspect who was already in custody in the police station. But they killed her, and there's very few. They haven't been arrested, but there's very little in the way of protests about it. When there's a black guy who gets killed, which is terrible, and I wouldn't wish that for any black guy, but if you'll see pictures of massive demonstrations, which is good, but when the countless amounts of black trans women are killed in the US and around the world, I think in the US they've probably got it's a terrible number, but I think if you compare it to places like Brazil, it's just off the charts. They don't ever get protests and marches. Well, very little apart from other trans people, from other black queer people. We don't get marches or protests or anything like that. And that's absolutely tragic. Even when people like Eric Garner in the US was killed for selling loose cigarettes, and hearing a couple months later, a forensics person, somebody who deals with causes of death, but saying that he was a ticking time bomb anyway, because Eric Garner was so overweight that he was going to die anyway. Yeah.
A lot of what I saw is that people also seem to have this idea that and obviously in this case, it's not what happened, but if a black person is doing a bad thing, that they still deserve to have a punishment. And it's like, well, no, like regardless of whether they were doing, anyone, but regardless of whether they were doing a crime or not, it still shouldn't mean that they have to die for it. And there's a lot of comparisons that I've seen as well. When a black person's done something, a white person's done something, both the exact same criminal act, they don't have any previous history of violence or criminal acts or anything like that, but the black person is still punished more severely or killed. And a lot of white people online are just excusing it of just being like, well, they did the wrong thing, so this is the punishment. And it's like, no, like, as in, you need to understand that it needs to be a level playing field with punishments.
What I've heard, you can always tell what ethnicity a shooter is. If he gets taken in alive, he's white.
Yeah.
Like, Dylan something, who shot 20 odd people in a church.
Is that the one where the
white.
cops spoke to him and he just got to have a cigarette and just chill for a while?
Yeah, and they sent out for burgers for him and everything. But some, black person selling loose cigarettes gets the life choked out of him. I wrote a poem ages ago, and I can only remember the bit about black people having pasts and white people always having future. So when something really bad happens, but he's still a young man, and it usually happens when it's something to do with sexual assault. Yeah, he did this bad thing, but he's got a future, and he was studying at Oxford or Cambridge, and it'll ruin his life. Yeah, fuck off. And also, if a black person does something, he came from a broken home and he lived on a council estate, and he did this petty theft in the past, and it's a completely different thing. There is never a level playing field with DID, because I'd only heard about it for its old name and from horror films. I thought that I was going to turn out to be violent and horrible, and that's absolutely everything I'm not. Even before I, got the diagnosis or anything like that, I've never been a violent person, but I've actually got myself in trouble several times for trying to protect people, for trying to break up a fight, or stop somebody from getting beaten up, end up getting into trouble for that. It's just not me. And I know it sort of seems obvious now, but I had such a fear that that's what was going to happen to me. And yeah, the media that I'd seen it's all fiction, but when that's all you ever see, it's like you've got no other point of reference. That I believed that's what was going to happen to me. And now, whenever I pray, I always thank God for my altars, that they helped me survive long before I even realised what was happening. Now, as a 3-year-old, with the abuse starting, that I could remember, my earliest memory is of being sexually abused when I was on my 3rd birthday. That the altars protected me at a time when I couldn't comprehend stuff like that. No 3-year-old is going to be able to understand what's going on then. I mean, the 3-year-olds who still believe in Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy and thing. So that my altars helped me to survive, and that they're a blessing. It's a life-saving thing to have these altars looking out for me. Really, and I'm glad that came along quickly after the fear of being violent, after the fear of being locked up and never let go ever again. The altars, it really is a blessing. I think just to even survive, really, where the damage that was done to the body, the physical damage of, sadly some kids don't survive, but somehow I survived. And the altars helped. It was just, because there was just no escape. School, home, church, that was the whole universe for me. Never allowed to go anywhere else. Those were the 3 places, and all 3 places were terrible. So, and also, I'd been drinking also from 3 years old. So, just the fact that I could make it through infant school, secondary school, and college. Just the fact that I got through all of that I'd, be sexually assaulted, and then you'd have to be at the dinner table with the person who did it. And I'm actually just started to write something about trauma and time travel. Well, how I, for decades, I had a very, very strong interest in the whole concept of time travel, and specifically travel to the past to change things, to stop the abuse from happening somehow. But nowadays it's very much like how, like you said, the altars holding different parts of the trauma that you couldn't deal with at the time, or even now. But how, for example, Lizzie is stuck in 1972, and Larry and Monroe are stuck in the 1980s. It's really, it's nice that it's become a positive thing for me, the whole concept around time. Or positive, a less negative, a less wishing that things hadn't happened, because when I was still wishing desperately that things hadn't happened and I hadn't been strong enough to change things, and if I could only figure out the whole time travel thing, when I was still doing that, I wasn't accepting things did happen. I think awful things happened and I can't change it. and that that things need to be dealt with now, and I'm just holding up the process, putting it off, partly because it's just so overwhelming and there's so little support, but also it's just accepting the past, that people who were supposed to care about you did terrible things and gaslit you all the way, and they still do it to this day, really. It's a lot.
When it comes to the queer identity and how you have interacted, I suppose, in queer circles, because you said before as well that you have had some very negative experiences in regards to them disregarding how race has come into play with like all of that. Have there been instances as well in which your alters have been at the front, interacting in any of those spaces? Or I suppose my question would be, when it comes to queerness, is that something that you yourself resonate with, or is that also something that as a collective amongst other alters as well, it's something that everyone kind of identifies with? Or how would you, I guess, describe that?
Okay. Gosh, when I got diagnosed in 2015, and in 2016 I stopped being part of a lot of the queer spaces that I used to belong to, because it was just ridiculous, not just for racism, but actually, yeah, mostly for racism, but for a lot of other things. There's a thing called BICON, which is a bisexual weekender, with like workshops during the day and parties at night. And that's like one of the longest running, or it is the longest running bisexual event in the world, but one of the longest queer events as well. It happens every year, and every year they have different organisers who deal with it, and it's all voluntary. And I stopped going to BICON because in 2016 they had one of the organisers making non-binary and trans jokes as part of the entertainment. Yeah, he had a quiz called "Is it a bird or a bloke?" And that's one of the organisers. And there is a lot of crossover between trans and non-binary people and bisexual people. And yeah, to have that on the first night's entertainment, and lots of people complained about it, but he was right back again on the second evening's entertainment. But yeah, that was 1 year after I got my diagnosis, and no, it's not happening. And I was out as having DID to my partners at the time, because I was polyamorous and very close friend. So I was out to like 6 people at that time, because I still had that very negative headspace about it. I've since written a lot about it and talked a bit, but not too much. But so yeah, that was the end of the majority of my queer interactions. As far as the alters go, yeah, I think Larry's right now is the only one identifying as gay, although Howard, one of the older alters, I think he's bi. He just looks at everybody and he's leering after everybody. And it's difficult sometimes, because in my mind it feels inappropriate. You know, he's not touching anybody, he's not saying anything inappropriate to anybody, but sometimes the looking it just feels to me not good. But you know, then it might be part of my kind of very religious, in a non-accepting way, background of like, to think about sinning with somebody is to sin. You know, I don't feel like that nowadays, but it's kind of got the dregs of that. Yeah, it's strange when I just have such positive times with when certain authors come to the fore, because Larry and Monroe are very, very creative and artistic. And Larry remembered how to crochet about a year ago, actually. And I'd learned how to crochet when I was a little child, but I hadn't done anything since I was about 10. And then suddenly, 40 years later, Larry remembers how to crochet. And suddenly I'm, creating crochet toys. I've got most of the Avengers in the crochet form. Monroe is very much a designer, dressmaker. I've been really into upcycling clothes. I mean, getting clothes as a fat person is tricky and expensive in the UK. So I don't throw my clothes out until they're practically worn through, because it's so difficult and expensive to get new stuff. But, when there's a hole in something, or I've dropped a beetroot salad down the front of my white t-shirt, I can cut out that bit and use another bit of fabric to turn it into a dress. But you won't, I've cut away the stain, and I put a bit of tartan where the stain used to be, and suddenly it's fashionable, or it is in my head. But Monroe is very much someone who loves to do that. And yeah, they've, some of them have got behaviours which are dangerous. Or would put outside Jack in a difficult position. Again, that thing about heading back, always trying to go back to my old family. But, there are other parts to it as well, about only feeling good if there's someone pretty much being abusive to me, because that feels safe. That feels to one of the alters, to Forest Jack, that feels safe and regular, and but it could hurt outside Jack and all the other alters as well.
Because I suppose something that they no, that's okay. I was gonna say, I mean, because I certainly can relate to that to a certain extent, because there are, like, even myself as well, but other authors as well in the system, that because you're so used to being abused in some way, shape or form during childhood, that those behaviors, like responses to it, are kind of just you're used to it, and that's what is your normal. And so even when I look back at, because I mean, for ourselves, I mean, I'm like, our body is 25, 25 tomorrow. Even looking back at, the 2 previous relationships that I've had, I can now look back and see that a lot of that abuse that I went through in those relationships is very reflective and similar to that normality that I was brought up in, during childhood. And so, I can certainly resonate with the fact that certain alters are going to, just see that behavior as normal and just kind of cop that abuse, because that's what they're used to, and that's what has been led to feel good, so to speak. And anything outside of that is just frightening and abnormal and is weird and bad.
Oh boy, yeah, it feels reassuring. It's a bit like with self-harm. It feels like to have that physical pain. It's like, oh, okay, sometimes it's a relief, because outside Jack doesn't know, or there aren't able to release all those emotions in a safe way, or doesn't know how to. So hurting myself physically, that's reassuring. That's something I can control, and that's I don't have to think about it. It's all automatic. But I know for myself, there's a lot of shame around when abusive things, especially sexually abusive things, fantasies that I have, turn me on. There's a lot of shame around that. And just this morning, I saw on Instagram the system who had the YouTube video.
Oh yeah, is that Indigo Systems? They're they're on Instagram they're known as unconventional mum. Or
That's
something
it.
like yeah,
They
yeah,
had
yeah.
a very good post about not slut shaming survivors, because for some survivors, being hypersexual that's one of the results of being a survivor. So is completely avoiding anything sexual. But I still have a lot of shame when my fantasies involve violent stuff or abusive stuff. You know, that those were the only sexual things I had until I was 23. So it's really hard to find positive, non-abusive stuff arousing for me. I really have to concentrate on it. Whereas the abusive stuff being arousing, that just happened. I don't have to think twice. But I do have a lot of shame around that. And yeah, I mean, and I usually end up worse for wear afterwards. But it takes so much energy. And I think that's something that people don't realise as well, just how much energy it takes to just be, to just survive, you know, without doing anything. I could spend the rest of my life, which it feels like during quarantine, stuck indoors, but it's still an effort to not hurt myself when emotions come up, to not drink, because that, you know, that was the way to feel better, to not engage in risky sexual stuff. It's just everything, to even like prepare a meal that's going to be okay for me, and not eating food that's expired, or starving myself, you know, which also used to happen as well. It takes so much effort, and it's so tiring.
Because it just becomes like this huge cycle. And again, especially when you have so much, you know, comorbid disorders and like so many different like symptoms, it's like one thing from one disorder will tick off part of it, a symptom from another disorder, and it just becomes this huge thing. And it's so misunderstood even by those in the community, because while yes, you know, we all have a trauma disorder, it's also that there are so many different things that have also influenced everyone's life up to this point, and other people don't get that. They're like, oh, but you know, we're all on a level playing field because we all have a trauma disorder. And it's like, well, no, because the disorder is going to affect everyone in different ways, because the trauma affects everyone in different ways, and how other aspects of their life growing up, whether it be, you know, that the trauma that occurred was, you know, involving like a family friend rather than family, so they had family support, or like, you know, vice versa. It's like there are so many different things. And especially when you've got like gender identity in the mix as well, it can complicate things a lot. And when, like, I suppose as well, like from my personal point of view of having, you know, borderline personality disorder, is that, you know, I'm sure you may also likely resonate with this, but it's like having that extra element of intensity to emotions definitely makes it so hard to kind of wrap your head around things in the moment, when it's just like everything just seems like it's way too much, and it's just like, nope, I can't cope with this. Whereas a person without borderline personality disorder, for example, may be able to rationalize things a little bit more at that point in time. So like you said, it's very difficult at times to not, you know, turn to other coping strategies like drinking or like self-harming and things like that, because the emotions are just so intense, and you just want the emotions to go away, or to direct them in a different direction.
I think that's going back to what you said at the beginning, really, about just medical people just not wanting to, or not able to, just take in that you've got more than one issue, really. And it doesn't have to be complicated if they bloody listen and not just write you off or not be defensive.